Welcome to On The Money Line, a podcast by MMA Play 365. I'm Newsome, and I'm here to break down UFC Atlantic City, which goes down this weekend. We're not at the Apex this weekend. It is a fight night, but we are not at the Apex. We're in an arena. We're in Atlantic City. We're going to have the crowd, the fans going crazy, and yeah, the atmosphere is just going to feel so much better after the last few weeks of being in the quiet Apex. I've said it before, I don't mind the Apex, maybe if it was once a month at most, hearing those strikes a little bit louder, hearing the corners. There is some intricacies of the Apex that I do like, but there's nothing like a crowd screaming when, two fighters are going to war and knocking 10 bells out of each other. And like I said, I hope we get that this weekend. I hope the atmosphere is electric. But just before we get into the breakdowns, as always, if you want to jump into the action, then you can do so at MMAplay365.com. We've got 3 different subscriptions: a next event, a monthly subscription, or an annual subscription. All subscriptions are inclusive of the handicapper betting advice. So my betting advice for fun gamblers with the fun parlays, my official bets, there's written breakdowns on there. And of course, you get the Base AI UFC prediction software predictions as well. So all the predictions from our AI at MMA Play 365 as well. From a betting perspective, we have had a couple of weeks back to back that haven't been great, but those weeks don't last long, and it's weird stuff as well that's putting us back. Like, you go back to the Bulgarian Christian Rodriguez fight that, we had I had 3 units on Isaac Bulgarian where he should have won that fight. Then last week we're having a fighter, one of our bets, getting disqualified for biting the opponent. So it's all low percentage stuff that will eventually just iron out, and then the wins will start returning. So nothing to worry or panic about there. Just keep the same process as I've kept for the last 7-8 years and everything will be absolutely fine. So yeah, if you do want to jump into the action this weekend, have a little bit of fun, drop some fun parlays, or if you just want to tail me long term, which you will win and profit long term if you do so, then make sure you're at MMAplay365.com. And that's it for the introductions, that's it for the promo. Let's get straight into the breakdowns, and we start, of course, as always, in the main event. In the women's flyweight division, we've got a really, really good fight here. We've got Erin Blanchfield versus Manon Fiorot, and it's a good fight because it's got to be a number 1 contenders fight. It has to be. I don't think the UFC have confirmed anything, but Erin Blanchfield is on an absolute tear, undefeated in the UFC, 6-0 in the UFC. Manon Fiorot exactly the same, undefeated in the UFC, 6-0 in the UFC. Both have been hyper prospects since they've joined the UFC and gone on this tear. Both have, faced some difficult opponents, but also had that step up in competition each time out to put them in a good spot for this exact type of fight. So although the UFC have not mentioned anything, we've got Erin Blanchfield that's ranked number 2 in the world, Manon Fiorot that's ranked number 3. The only fighter that's above them is Valentina Shevchenko, and she's fought Alexa Grasso a couple of times now. Maybe Shevchenko does get the next title fight and then it's these two after, but there's got to be serious implications for the winner of this fight because there's just nowhere else to go. If Valentina Shevchenko does fight Alexa Grasso, then there's nowhere else to go for either fighter. Manon Fiorot would be number 2 if she won. Erin Blanchfield would stay as number 2 if she won. So it's got to be a number 1 contender fight. And the fact that the UFC have put it as a main event on a fight night as well, over 5 rounds, again, that does give an indication of the UFC just want to make sure that both women are 5-round ready, which they're both going to be. I don't imagine any of these fighters gassing out or not being able to do the 5 rounds, even if the pace is quite high and intense. And yeah, look, it's a brilliant fight, and the fact that Erin Blanchfield has fought Taila Santos then makes this fight a little bit easier to analyse, in my opinion, because before that Taila Santos fight, there was questions, what happens when Blanchfield genuinely does fight someone that's very technical from a striking perspective, that's got a little bit of power, that's more physical than her. Because look, for as good as Blanchfield is, her physicality doesn't seem to be as strong as some of the other ladies in the division. So yeah, it's one of those that it definitely was in the back of my mind anyway. And look, fighting Taila Santos was not only a huge step up in competition for Blanchfield, because Santos could have been a UFC champion herself if, there wasn't that unfortunate situation with the eye in the Valentina Shevchenko fight. Santos was doing amazingly well, better than anybody had ever fought against Shevchenko before. So Santos was a huge step up in competition for Blanchfield. She had great striking, powerful striker, but she was also a black belt in BJJ. She also had decent wrestling as well. So she was the complete fighter for Blanchfield to, test against. And look, Blanchfield had a difficult maybe 5 to 7 minutes in that fight. Definitely lost the first round. Probably was losing the first half of the second round, but then really started to come back into the fight once she'd got her reads down, and once she'd sort of got past the strikes of Santos where she could start wearing on her a little bit. And if that fight was 5 rounds, this is the difference. Like, the 3-round fight that Blanchfield beat Santos with was close. Blanchfield did win the fight. I don't think there was any, I don't think there's any debate in regards to who won on the scorecards. But if that had been 5 rounds, then we wouldn't have been talking about a close fight. We'd have been talking about a very comfortable win for Blanchfield, because she would have eventually taken over and comfortably won, round 4 and 5 in that fight, in my opinion, with how it was panning out. So yeah, look, Blanchfield has been tested against that type of striker, and Manon Fiorot is also that type of striker. In regards to the striking, when you're comparing Fiorot to Santos, they're very similar. I think Fiorot might be a little bit faster, but Santos for me is more powerful and more physical. But the difference is Santos has got the better wrestling game, in my opinion, and the better grappling game than Manon Fiorot. So here, arguably, you could make that argument that Blanchfield is fighting a slightly easier version of Taila Santos. And I say easier with a pinch of salt. It's not going to be an easy fight, but compared to Taila Santos, I think Blanchfield is going to have more success in the wrestling and grappling where she couldn't against Taila Santos. And I think that Blanchfield will be able to get this fight down to the mat. And that's the key thing here. Look, Manon Fiorot, she is also quite physical. She's very tall. She's going to have a reach advantage over Blanchfield, strength advantage possibly as well. But again, now we can say it's nothing that Blanchfield hasn't seen before, because Santos was that taller, more physical fighter. Blanchfield's still got to mind the P's and Q's, because Fiorot will be the better striker here. But again, Blanchfield's 24 years old, and her striking's getting a little bit better each time out that we see her, to the point where, look, she was putting it on Jessica Andrade, who at the time everybody was saying, oh, Blanchfield has to get this fight down to the mat. It has to be a grappling fight, me included. And it turned out that, yeah, she did have to get the fight down, but she did much better on the feet than anybody expected. So I don't expect this to be a complete whitewash on the feet where Blanchfield's shooting desperation takedowns because she's getting absolutely destroyed. I think Blanchfield can hang on the feet with Fiorot. Does she win a 25-minute kickboxing fight against Fiorot? No. But I think she can hang enough to be able to get her takedowns, or at least shoot takedowns, break the fluidity of Fiorot's striking, break the flow up a little bit, and just make life difficult for her. I said this before, a long time before, that I think Blanchfield is a future UFC champion. I still believe that now. At 24 years old, it's crazy, because this is nowhere near a finished product for Erin Blanchfield either. She is going to continuously get better everywhere, not just the striking, but the wrestling and grappling, and that's a scary prospect to think about as well, because her wrestling, well, not so much her wrestling, but her grappling, in my opinion, there's no one else in the division that comes close. So she's a specialist with the grappling, but then she's also got wrestling to back that up with, and then her striking's getting better as well. At 24 years old, I think she's going to be one of these future champions that's a long reigning champion, and I think Manon Fiorot's just the next step in that process. This would have been a much more difficult prediction to make if Blanchfield hadn't have fought Santos, but there are a lot of similarities between Santos physically and stylistically to Manon Fiorot, and the fact that Blanchfield did beat Santos and get through those strengths of Santos in regards to where Santos is best, I think that she can be able to get at Fiorot and get past those strengths of Fiorot in the same manner. The only slight difference here is I think that Fiorot is going to have much better cardio than Santos. So where Santos did start to fade a little bit late in round 3, I don't think that'll happen with Fiorot. It'll be a hard fought fight for Blanchfield, but I think Blanchfield's going to pass this test. I think the bottom line is she's going to be able to get takedowns. And maybe initially the takedowns aren't easy. Maybe when she does complete the takedowns, the first few, Fiorot's getting back up to her feet, but eventually Blanchfield's grappling, I think, is going to be the difference maker. So for those reasons, I'm picking Erin Blanchfield to win this fight. And in the next fight in the co-main event, we've got an explosive fight here. We've got Vicente Luque versus Joaquin Buckley. And the fact that this fight, in my opinion, is going to be explosive, I have some concerns on the side of Vicente Luque. And look, I'm not going to be banging this drum for a long time because this fight will be the fight that tells us. But after that fight that Luque had with Jeff Neal, there was some serious issues that Luque had to the point where there was a time where he didn't think he was going to be cleared to fight again. He had a bleed on the brain from that Jeff Neal fight. He had to be cleared by neurosurgeons and other, medical professionals before even being allowed to book a fight again. So there was a lot of things that, Vicente Luque had going on, and eventually he did get cleared to fight. I think there was 2 neurosurgeons, and the commission also did, in-depth tests into Luque to make sure he was okay to fight. And of course, he was cleared to fight against Rafael Dos Anjos. So this isn't the first fight that Luque's had back since that beating that he took against Jeff Neal, since, that bleed on the brain that he had. So yeah, this isn't the first fight back. So there's that element that eases it a little bit. But to be fair, fighting Rafael Dos Anjos, who doesn't have that crazy one-punch knockout power, he doesn't, he's a good all-round fighter, but he does prefer to try and wrestle and grapple opposed to strike. And at his age and at this stage in his career, all I'm trying to say is Rafael Dos Anjos wasn't a huge knockout threat. He wasn't a huge damage threat for Luque. So it was actually quite a good fight for Luque to sort of not get knocked about a little bit. But at some point, you're going to have to put that past you and fight somebody who is going to be a damage threat, who is going to have power, and that's Buckley. And I do worry for Vicente Luque in this fight for 2 reasons. One, Buckley is going to be powerful and explosive and be putting it on Luque, unlike RDA couldn't do, if that makes sense. And then the other side to this, if Buckley does start, putting a load of power strikes together and combinations on Luque, and Luque's backing up and covering up, does he start having flashbacks from the Neal fight? Does he mentally check out in regards to, the fact that he's eating all these shots and he knows how dangerous that's going to be due to his situation that he had before? There's a lot of different variables in this fight that could take place, but Buckley is definitely that test now for Luque. Let's see how Luque holds up, because look, before the Jeff Neal fight, Luque's been in so many wars. Like, he's still young in age, but there's a lot of miles on the clock. And I think that I was saying it, I'm sure a lot of other people are saying it as well, when fighters like Luque are in these wars over the years and the beating fighters are knocking them out just because they've been the more durable fighter, they've been the better nail, and then eventually the better hammer. At some point, that will catch up with a fighter. And Luque, to be fair, he had war after war after war. He was taking shots, nobody could put him out, but then bang, Jeff Neal put it on Vicente Luque and knocked him out. And he didn't just TKO him, drop him, and then the referee stop it with strikes. He got the faceplant KO, so he shut the lights off of Luque. And after all the wars you've had, your body finally shuts off, and then where do you go after that? What's your durability like? There's a lot of question marks there. The other side to this stylistically is, look, Buckley is also a southpaw striker, just like Jeff Neal was, and Jeff Neal was finding a lot of holes, a lot of gaps in the striking, and I think Buckley can have that same sort of success against Luque. So not only is Buckley powerful, but I think he's also the same stance as what Jeff Neal was that caused Luque a lot of problems. Because he's a southpaw, that outside low kick is not going to be as prominent for Vicente Luque. That's one of his best weapons. And then, like I say, you've got a Buckley who's young, athletic, fast. So look, from a skill versus skill perspective, I still think Luque might be the better technical fighter. He's certainly a fighter that's fought the better level of competition. Make no mistake about it, this is a step up in competition for Buckley, but it's a deserved one. He's been looking great since he's moved down to welterweight as well. And I just think that, look, like I say, Luque's the slightly better quality fighter, but I think Buckley's got the youth on him. I think he's got the speed on him. I think he's got the power on him. He's also southpaw, where Vicente Luque's had problems before, like I mentioned with Jeff Neal. I just think there's a lot of upside on Buckley here, and there's a few red flags with the style of fighter that Buckley is, and the red flags on Luque's side. Like I said, this is... Look, if Luque comes into this fight, eats a load of shots, does well, and ends up putting Buckley out, then, like I said, I'll stop banging that drum. I'll put it to bed that, the issue that Luque had after the Neil fight. But this fight is going to be really telling, because Luque is going to get hit with hard shots unless he knocks him out with the first punch before anything lands, which is highly unlikely. So yeah, there's some definite question marks on Luque's side. I think that Buckley's got enough upside here. For those reasons, I'm picking Joaquin Buckley to win this fight. And in the next fight, we've got Bruno Silva versus Chris Weidman. Now, it's a dangerous fight for Chris Weidman. I know that there's going to be a lot of people that are quite concerned for Weidman in this fight, and I'm the same as well. It just, Father Time catches everybody up in this game. In MMA, it's just something that no fighter can avoid. Every fighter will experience at some point if they go long enough. And it just seems like it's that time for Chris Weidman now. In all fairness to Weidman, I did expect him to get knocked out last time out against Brad Tavares. He did get beat by Tavares, but he did stay the course. The flip side to that is, look, Tavares has only got 5 wins by KO TKO from like 20 professional wins, I think. So it's not as if Tavares was this knockout puncher, but he could knock somebody out like he has done before. He does have power, and Weidman withstood it. So you've got to give credit to Weidman there. But with Bruno Silva here, it's a different type of power. This is a fighter that's won 23 professional fights, and out of those 23 professional fights, he has 20 knockouts. He has legitimate power, both hands, kicks, knees, elbows. He's a very good striker. So for Chris Weidman here, in my opinion, he's got to get that wrestling going early. And the thing is, I actually think Weidman has a legitimate path to victory in that area. I think if he does wrestle and grapple Silva, not only can he tire Silva out a little bit, but he's definitely going to be the better wrestler. He's definitely going to get takedowns. Does he keep Silva down? Maybe early on, no. But if Weidman stays the course with this and continues to get the takedowns, and the cardio holds up for him doing that, with that game plan, with that style of fighting, then I do think that he could wear on Silva a little bit. Definitely there's a path to victory there for Weidman. The problem is, all fights start standing, and there's going to be striking in this fight. There's no way that Bruno Silva lands 0 strikes on the feet and Weidman wins this fight. Like, Silva is going to land on Weidman at some point, and the fact that Silva's so powerful, so accurate, and uses all 8 limbs, so to speak, with the knees and the elbows, along with the kicks and the punches and the combinations, I just think that Weidman is going to have to withstand some powerful shots from Silva if he's going to win this fight, if he's going to get his own game going. And I just don't think that he's going to be able to withstand those hard shots. I do think this is one of the fights where Weidman's going to get his lights turned off. I think that, although, like I say, there's a path to victory there for Weidman, which I've already explained, I'm just not convinced that he can eat the shots he needs to be able to eat in order to make this fight go his way. Because, like I say, this is a fist fight. Weidman is going to have to accept that something's going to be coming back from the other side here. I just don't think he's able to take what comes back from the other side. Silva's, like I said, has got brutal power. If he lands on Weidman, starts hurting him, maybe those takedowns are then desperation shots that Bruno Silva can stuff and keep Weidman on the feet. But yeah, I think that Silva's going to get at Weidman at some point. It's a shame. Like I say, Chris Weidman's got a legit path to victory. I just don't think he gets to hit it in the way that he needs to. So for those reasons, I'm picking Bruno Silva to win this fight. And in the next fight, we've got Chidi and Njokuani versus Rhys McKee. Now, I'm going to be honest, I've been back and forwards on this fight. I think that you can make a legitimate argument for either side here. Like, Njokuani is a fighter that I've liked quite a lot. When I saw him come into the UFC, I cashed him a couple of times as an underdog, including that real quick knockout of Marc-Andre Barriou. And I like Njokuani. And I think that from a striking perspective, he's sharp, he's good, he's versatile. Again, you've got the knees, you've got the elbows, you've got a legit kickboxing background. But he's also a black belt in jiu-jitsu, and that's something that he's worked on over the years, because initially in his career, opponents didn't want to stand and strike with Njokuani, so he was getting found out on the mat. So he fixed those holes, and I just liked everything about Njokuani. But in his last couple of fights, I've lost money, I think. I've lost the bets in the last 2 fights. I bet him against Albert Joraev. I bet him against Michal Oleksiejczuk. And there's just an element of him breaking inside the cage. And that's where, we didn't see that initially. We never saw that in the early moments of Njokuani's, UFC career. But now we're starting to see it a little bit, and this is where I've got question marks in this fight, because from a strike versus strike perspective, I think that Njokuani is definitely the better striker in this fight. It's just if he doesn't get McKee out, McKee's the exact type of opponent that like Michalo Luxachuk was. You know, he'll take your shots, you'll probably drop him, you'll bust him up, but if you don't get him out of there and you expend all your energy trying to, then he's going to come back and wear on you and win this fight. And Rhys McKee is a very, very good nail. He's, you know, I think Njokuani is the better hammer, but McKee's the better nail. And with Njokuani already showing signs that he can be broken if things aren't going his way, or if he can't finish the fight or put the opponent away, then, you know, he can be got at. And I kind of feel that this is where I'm at with this fight. I'm not saying that McKee's the better fighter, because I don't think he is. I think Njokuani is. If Njokuani has a good first round, which I anticipate he does, where does his cardio go after that? Does he break if McKee starts coming back in this fight? Is it one of these fights where Njokuani wins the first round and then a couple of minutes of the second round and then McKee's still there, but now Njokuani's tired because he's poured a lot into it, and McKee starts landing back on his own shots, and then suddenly Njokuani's on the back foot and then he starts to crumble? I can absolutely see that type of fight. I can also see Njokuani knocking McKee out in the first round as well. So it's a really tough fight to call because of the sort of frailties that we've seen from Njokuani's last few fights. And I think against McKee, who is the type of fighter that will eat all your shots and then start coming back, putting the pressure on and breaking you, which is exactly what we've seen from Njokuani in the last few fights, that makes this fight more difficult to predict and analyse. But for me, I'm actually going to go with the underdog here, because I can see a path to victory for both fighters. I can make the argument for both fighters winning, so I'll side with the underdog. I'm picking Rhys McKee to win this fight. And in the next fight, we've got Nursulton Ruziboev versus Sedriques Dumas. And Ruziboev, you know, I knew that this would happen. Like, he's like a minus 300, 350 favourite in this fight, and I knew that this was going to happen. I bet him against Bruno Hulk Ferreira in his UFC debut. I think I got Ruziboev at like plus 180, 185, something like that. I got him at a high line, which was crazy because this dude is tall, he's long, he's got sneaky power, he's a decent grappler. He will put himself in some bad positions on the mat, but eventually, you know, those positions can be overcome, and he does start to do good work from the grappling perspective. So I'm not saying he's the perfect fighter, but he's definitely a very difficult fighter to beat. And the fact that he was that big of an underdog against Bruno Ferreira, like I say, I cashed Ruziboev there. And yeah, I knew after that, as soon as I saw that fight end, and I knew that I'd cashed my big underdog bet, that he wasn't going to be that underdog again. And yeah, look, there's that recency bias on the line at minus 300, minus 350, but I don't think it's recency bias that's unwarranted and unjustified. Sometimes you see a fighter that's an underdog cash easily, and then they're an unwarranted favourite in the next fight because of that last fight. That's how recency bias works. And then that fighter loses as the favourite that they shouldn't have been, but I don't think that this is the case here. Look, Sedriques Dumas is a decent fighter. Again, okay striking, okay wrestling, grappling, and he's proved it already. He's going to win fights in the UFC, but against Ruziboev, I think Ruziboev's going to be bigger, longer, sharper. I think he's going to just be better everywhere. I think he's the better striker, wrestler, grappler, and I think that Dumas it's not going to be a whitewash or anything, so maybe the line could be a little bit shorter, but it really just wouldn't shock me if Ruziboev did put on a performance that covers like minus 250, minus 300. And yeah, look, like I say, it's difficult to see where Dumas wins this fight. Maybe Ruziboev is just not on this fight. Maybe he has an off fight and Sedriques Dumas looks okay. But even if Ruziboev's not fully on it, I still think it's going to be a close and competitive fight in that situation. And that's if Ruziboev is having an off night. I think that Ruziboev's going to be coming in there with a ton of confidence. Like I say, he's going to have some physical advantages, and I just think he's going to be slightly better in every single area. And even though it's only slight in every area, that normally means that a fighter has a relatively comfortable fight and they cover that relatively high price tag as well. So for all the reasons that I've mentioned, I'm picking Nursulton Ruziboev to win this fight. And in the next fight, we've got Bill Algeo versus Kyle Nelson. And look, Bill Algeo gives you scares from time to time in regards to, when he's in fights that he should win. Like I can remember betting Algeo against TJ Brown, and I thought Algeo had TJ Brown, especially like when he's putting performances he put up against like an Andre Feely, for example, and then he goes against TJ Brown, who's a big step down in competition, and you think he's going to roll all over him, but then he gets a little bit closer than what you like. And in fact, TJ Brown took that first round against Bill Algeo, but then Bill Algeo put the pressure on. He took TJ Brown's best shots, forced that constant forward pressure and just started to, methodically break him down. Now with Kyle Nelson from a skill set perspective, I'm not sure. It's tough to say, because what I want to say is I'm not sure, how much longer he'll be around in the UFC, but he's coming off back-to-back wins and he has wins in the UFC, so you can't really say that. But from a skill set perspective, I definitely think he's in the lower echelons of the UFC, if that makes sense. I think that Bill Algeo, pretty much wherever you look, striking, wrestling, grappling, I think he's a better fighter than Kyle Nelson. Where Nelson is actually pretty impressive in regards to his physicality. So he's a big dude, he's strong, and he can grind and make things ugly and clinch with his opponents and force them against the cage and nullify them a little bit that way. The problem with Nelson that I have the predominant problem that I have with Nelson is he does fade the longer the fights go on. So his first round is always his best round. He's dangerous in that first round. He'll throw with power and he does have knockout power. Like I said, he's a big dude, but then if you get past that first round, if you eat his biggest shots and you really start to take him late into the fight, that's where you can get at him and that's where you can fade. And it's not every fight. It is, fighter dependent. Like you look at Nelson's fight against Padilla, and Padilla won that first round but then lost the other two rounds. So, it does depend on opponents specifically, and Bill Algeo is that exact type of opponent. Is that type of opponent that's going to probably I'm not going to say take a beating, but probably going to eat some big shots in that first round. He'll make you nervous if you're betting on him, but then he'll get through that first round. Nelson will have given everything that he had, and then Algeo will again apply that constant forward pressure, look to break his opponents and take over the fight the longer it goes on. And that's where I see a big problem for Nelson, just in that aspect of the fight. But like I say, from a stylistic perspective, look, Bill Algeo can get hit. That's probably one of his holes. He's not that defensively aware, and Nelson, that'll allow Nelson to have that good first round. But if Algeo starts mixing in takedowns, and I think that Algeo is one of the most underrated wrestlers in the division. I'm not saying he's the best wrestler, I'm just saying he's underrated. And you look at his frame, he's tall, he's long. You don't really associate that typically with a wrestler. The stereotypical MMA wrestler, short, stocky. That's not Algeo, but that doesn't mean he's not a good wrestler. He is a good wrestler. His background was within wrestling, and then he's also got a black belt in Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu as well. So Algeo is a complete fighter. Again, he's got, where his ceiling is, but he's a complete fighter, and I think he's better than Nelson in every aspect. It's just in that first round, Nelson comes out hard, he's physical. I think he's going to be a bit stronger than Algeo. I think Algeo's going to take a few hard punches in that first round, but Algeo's tough, he's durable. I think he's going to be one of those fights where Algeo starts slow, lets Nelson sort of empty the tank a little bit and then takes over late. So for those reasons, I'm picking Bill Algeo to win this fight. And in the next fight, this is a really good fight from a stylistic perspective. We've got Virna Jandiroba versus Lupita Godinez. So like I say, stylistically, it's great because both fighters, although Godinez is more of the striker here, both fighters do like to, from Godinez's side, wrestle, Jandiroba's side, grapple. But Godinez, obviously, when she's wrestling, she wrestles to grapple. So, you could technically say that, look, both fighters like to be on top of their opponents. And that is predominantly where they're best. Like, you look at Lupita Godinez. Yes, she doesn't wrestle every fight, but she comes from a wrestling background, a family of wrestlers, I believe, as well. So she's got that wrestling in her blood. Now, Godinez, like I said, she is more of the striker. So from a boxing perspective, I think she's going to be the better striker very slightly in this fight. Jandiroba is more of a predominant grappler. She will strike. You don't become a 19-3 professional fighter and be at this level in the UFC if you can't strike. But the striking is where she's weakest, and she's built a career out of just being able to hang from a striking perspective enough to be able to get her hands on her opponents and get them down to the mat. Now, Again, it's one of these fights where I feel that you can go backwards and forwards on it, and you can make a case for both fighters, because you look at Godinez in a last fight against Tabitha Ricci, a fight I actually bet Tabitha Ricci in that fight, thinking that, look, Ricci's wrestling's good, her topside grappling's good, she'll be able to get Godinez down at some point. And Godinez defended 6 takedowns from Ricci across those 3 rounds, and some of those takedowns were actually shot decently, and Godinez did a good job from a defensive perspective of being able to keep the fight on the feet. And yes, it was a close split decision, but Godinez did do some good work on the feet, striking and with a pocket boxing. So from a defensive wrestling perspective, Godinez is there. But where I'm a little bit unsure here is because Jandiroba doesn't have that same type of wrestling as what a Tabitha Ricci does. Jandiroba, it's not all about the single legs and the double legs and the traditional wrestling takedowns. Jandiroba will get a hold of you. She will look to, sneak around the back if she can, or, she'll look to go over under and then start trying to reap a leg out. And it's what you can probably call jiu-jitsu type of takedowns, where you're looking for the trips, the throws, the leg reaps, the drag downs, and just even taking the back if you need to, and then forcing taking the back whilst the fight stood up and then forcing the fight down on the mat. So it's these different types of takedowns. So with Godinez, she's shown that she's got a defensive ability to defend the traditional wrestling takedowns. But I've just got questions here of, does Jandiroba get this fight down to the mat? Because that's the big question. Can Jandiroba get the fight down to the mat? And can she do it in more than 1 round? Because I think that's, if you answer yes to those questions, then you're sort of leaning on the Jandiroba side. And I do think she'll be able to get the fight down. I think it won't be easy. I definitely think Godinez is going to come out harder in this fight, start faster. But I think Jandiroba, eventually she's going to be able to get takedowns. It's very rare that she doesn't. And I think that if she does get Godinez down, then Jandiroba on top of Godinez, you're going to see a bit of a levels thing with the jiu-jitsu. So where Godinez is going to be the better striker, I think that although both fighters are good grapplers, I think Jandiroba's the better grappler. And if Jandiroba gets on top of Godinez, I think that she can cause problems. I'm not saying she's going to be able to submit Godinez and get her out of there, although it's a possibility. But if Jandiroba's on top of Godinez, I think she can have more than enough control time to be winning rounds. It's just like I say, I think she's going to need to do it in more than 1 round, because if you can only get the takedown in 1 round, then I think Godinez wins the fight. So this is where I can come on either side of the fence with these 2 fighters. But like I say, I'm going to side, like I said earlier, with the Chidi and Njokuani and Rhys McKee fight. Look, when you can make a case and an argument for both sides, more often than not, I'm going to be siding with the underdog. So I think that, like I say, Jandiroba will be able to get takedowns in this fight. Will it be enough? We'll see. I still think it's going to be close and competitive, but I'm going to be picking Virna Jandiroba to win this fight. And in the next fight, we've got Andre Petroski versus Jacob Malkoun. I think this is going to be, well, I'm predicting a bit of a binary fight here. I think that Petroski is going to start better. I think with Petroski's size, his physicality, the power, the strength, and his wrestling and grappling ability is going to allow him to win this first round. But the thing is, Jacob Malkoun, I low-key really like Jacob Malkoun, and when Malkoun's in positions where he's an underdog, I'll always take a really close look. And in this fight, he's not an underdog, he's the favourite. You can kind of get it with how I feel that the fight's going to play out. So with Malkoun's one of these guys that'll stick to you like glue. He's got, again, underrated wrestling. It's not your traditional type of wrestling all the time, though, although he does have a really good single leg to foot sweep to get fights down to the mat. And Malkoun's won fights against other good wrestlers and grapplers, just like Petroski. The reason why I think Malkoun's going to have a tough opening part to this fight is because, like I say, Petroski's physicality, he's also a wrestler and a grappler, so Malkoun's going to be met in the cage with another good wrestler and grappler that he's going to be outmatched from a physical perspective. So I expect Petroski to have a good first round because of that. The issue with Petroski, and everyone's going to be saying the exact same thing if you listen to multiple people breaking this fight down, is Petroski fades in a big way the longer the fights go on. And the work that Petroski, I think, is going to be forced to do in this first round is going to tire him out, because Malkoun's not just going to sit on the outside and let this fight be a slow burner and Petroski do whatever he wants. If Petroski's not forcing the wrestling, Malkoun will force the wrestling, which then forces Petroski to wrestle defensively, which then I think he'll turn into offense and have a good first round because of that. but the work that Petroski puts in that type of fight, I think it's going to be a higher paced first round than maybe what Petroski wants, and because of that, I think he starts fading after that first round, and once he starts getting tired, the takedowns are just going to be there for Malkoun, because Petroski, his movement will slow down, he'll not have as much strength, he'll be tired, and then once he's on his back, he's got to work off his back. And I think Malkoun is literally just going to, like I say, lose round one, and then from round two start taking over, get the takedown, start tiring Petroski more and more the longer the fight goes on, take him into deep waters, and then by the time we're in the third round, I think it's going to be a wrap for Malkoun. So yeah, like I say, I feel like it's a bit of a binary fight. I'd love to be proved wrong. If Petroski can eventually sort these cardio issues out and him be able to put on a high pace and keep that for at least like 2.5 rounds, I think he'd be a real problem in the UFC. But the problem is actually because, of the energy expenditure early and then not being able to keep up that pace late. And that's where Malkoun gets guys. So for those reasons, I'm picking Jacob Malkoun to win this fight. And in the next fight, we've got the newcomer Conor Matthews versus Denis Buzukja. So both fighters been on the Contender Series a couple of times, I believe, and it's actually a really well-matched fight. I think it could potentially be a really good fight as well. Conor Matthews, listen, just digressing a little bit, anybody that's listening to this, Conor Matthews really looks like somebody, and it's been frustrating me. I can't put my finger on it. He looks identical to somebody. I don't know whether it's a UFC fighter or a movie film star. I'm not sure, but if you see it as well, and you know which other person he looks like, please drop it in the the replies of the comments in the YouTube channel, because it's been driving me nuts. He looks like the twin of somebody, and I just cannot think for the life of me who it is. But yeah, anyway, back to the fights. Conor Matthews, Denis Buzukja. Look, both fighters are really well-rounded, good striking, wrestling, grappling. They've got a little bit of everything. With Conor Matthews, though, I kind of feel like he has some very green moments inside the cage. I think he's going to be a fighter that's going to win fights in the UFC, but I feel like he's going to need maybe 2 or 3 fights to really find his feet and, ground himself. And I just don't know. He's a little bit flaky, but so's Denis Buzukja as well. And when I say flaky, I'm not being disrespectful. I'm not saying that, there's a skill set issue there. I just feel that it comes with experience in the UFC. These fighters, you look at like Donald Cerrone and Jim Miller, these fighters are solid. They're never flaky. Like, they'll lose, but they're never ever flaky. And that's because they've gained that experience at the top level, fighting in the UFC for years. And at one point, Jim Miller was a little bit flaky. At one point, Cerrone was a little bit flaky. But again, you get that with experience, and I feel like that's what both of these fighters lack, is experience. So it's one of those fights that could potentially be a little bit unpredictable, because I see them both having good moments, but I see them both having moments where, there's a lapse of concentration, or, there's an unforced error, a little bit of a mistake. So I kind of see it being a little bit back and forth, but I trust Buzukja just maybe a little bit more. I think from where he trains, he's got good guys around him. I think from the wrestling and grappling side that he's there as well. Like, it's a tough fight. It is a tough fight. It is going to be close and competitive. And like I say, I feel like it's going to be back and forth at moments. So it's who you trust a little bit more. I kind of like I can't really say I like the team around Buzukja a little bit more, because Conor Matthews is training with guys like Calvin Kattar and Rob Font. So yeah, it's a tough one. I think it's going to be a close fight, but I am going to be siding with Buzukja. I think that he's might just be that little bit more well-rounded, and when the going gets tough, I think Buzukja might just be there ahead of Matthews. So for those reasons, I'm picking Denis Buzukja to win this fight. And in their next fight, we've got Angel Pacheco versus Caolan Loughran. And this could be quite wild. We saw Pacheco in the Contender Series against Danny Silva, who we saw a couple of weeks ago. Big win against Josh Kulibau. And yeah, look, Pacheco was beaten up and he was outmatched, and Danny Silva did a really good job against him. But Pacheco never quit. He never crumbled under the pressure. He was there. He was still firing back, and he saw the fight through, which was quite impressive. And he did have some moments against Danny Silva, but like I say, ultimately he was outmatched. So the bare minimum that you can expect from Pacheco here is he's going to be tough, he's going to be durable, and he's going to be game to fight. He'll be game to stand in the pocket and strike. And then you look at Caolan Loughran on the other side. This dude is an epitome of a bulletproof mindset, tough, will absolutely stand and strike if that's what you want to do with him. I bet Loughran as an underdog in his UFC debut and against Lapilus. And look, it turned out to be a bad stylistic fight for Loughran because of Lapilus's outstanding takedown defense. Loughran isn't going to come against many more guys that have got better takedown defense than Lapilus. Like that was a very, very rough fight for Loughran, but he still made it very close. And it's still, you go to the decision and you think, could this actually slide to Loughran's side? I personally didn't score it to Loughran, but it wouldn't be one of those fights where if it had been scored to Loughran, you'd have been crying, robbery or anything like that. Like, it was a close fight, and I just don't think Pacheco's on that level of Lapilus from any perspective. Striking, wrestling, grappling, and that's why Loughran's a big favourite in this fight, because he's better in every area. He's a better striker, he's more aggressive, he's got that Danny Silva type of style where he'll be in your face, landing combinations, but he'll be able to eat the shots that you're firing back at him, because I'm telling you now, to beat Loughran, you are going to either have to completely dominate him or knock him out. And I just don't think Pacheco's going to do any of those two things. And then when Loughran gets his wrestling going, grappling, I just think that he's got Pacheco's number wherever the fight goes. And you can never say never in this game. Again, the UFC level, 4-ounce gloves, the pro fighters, anything can happen. But I am having a hard time picking against Loughran, because where does Pacheco beat him outside of just catching him on the button with a clean punch? I just don't know where he does. I think if this is a 15-minute kickboxing fight, I think Loughran gets the better of him. But then you start mixing in the wrestling and the grappling, because it's not a kickboxing fight, it's an MMA fight. And I think Loughran, comfortably takes this fight, and I think it's a great fight for him to get in the win column, reset, and then go on a surge up the division, because I do think Loughran in a couple of years' time is going to be up there with the best in the division at the top. So yeah, for those reasons, I'm picking Caolan Loughran to win this fight. And in the next fight, we've got Julio Arce versus Herbert Burns. And look, before I get into the breakdowns, when I first saw this line, I was like, holy shit. And I almost bet Herbert Burns just out of principle, like Julio Arce being like a -600 favourite against somebody that does have a legit path to victory. Seems a little bit crazy to me, but then, you start looking at the fight a little bit and it's like, look, is it worth that shot? And I don't know. I couldn't really get there to pull the trigger on a bet, but yeah, look, I think the line is massively off here, and that's because Burns does have a legit path to victory. There's other issues around Burns. For a start, stylistically, Arce is going to be the better striker. It's not even going to be close. I think that Burns, when I say close, I think if it's a technical fight, that's what I mean. It's not going to be close. Burns can explode with these big shots, and all it takes is one to catch Arce and knock him out. He's been knocked out before, so it can happen again. But from a technical striking perspective, especially defensively as well, Arce just seems way more sound. So from the striking side, I think that Arce's got this fight covered. Now, wrestling wise, this is where it's close. I think that, look, Herbert Burns isn't like a beast wrestler, but neither's Arce. So I don't know whether Burns can get a hold of Arce and drag him down, or maybe Burns just gets a body lock and climbs the back and gets on his back maybe. And, again, I spoke about these jiu-jitsu style takedowns when I broke down the Jandiroba fight a couple of minutes ago. So maybe that's there for Burns. But if this fight hits the mat, there's absolutely no way that Arce is better than Herbert Burns on the mat. Herbert Burns is going to be the better grappler. He's going to be a threat on the mat. And that's the path to victory. And I just don't think that path to victory is big enough to not warrant the current betting line. But the other intangible stuff is, look, Burns can gas out, he can tire, he can break a little bit in the cage. So there's those things that are baked into the line as well. And like I say, it's not, for me, I don't think anybody should be touching a -600 on Arce unless, you've got like a 10-leg parlay or something like that and you're just wanting to throw something in to boost it. But outside of that, I think it's a fight that you should really stay away from. But it's also a fight where I feel Arce might have moments where he's on the mat, and that's the problem. But I think from when you look at both fighters, from a skill set perspective, from a mentality perspective, a cardio perspective, physicality perspective, I do think Arce ticks more boxes. So it is a pick on Julio Arce to win the fight, but like I say, man, like Herbert Burns has got a dangerous path to victory here that could upset and break a lot of parlays here. But from a pick and prediction perspective, I'm picking Julio Arce to win this fight. And in their next fight, we've got a rematch. We've got Aibo Aslan making his UFC debut against Anton Turkalj. These two guys fought back in lockdown in 2020, 4 years ago. Yeah, that's how long lockdown was away. And I was actually at that fight behind closed doors. It was a fight in Brave in Sweden, and it was, like I say, really uncertain times. Face masks actually weren't even being worn in Sweden. But yeah, it was one of those where they couldn't have crowds, they couldn't have the live events or anything like that with the big crowd. So yeah, I was actually there for that fight. And look, Aibo was 23 years old, I think. There he was young. He's still relatively green now, and we'll get into this, but he was even greener back then. He was full of aggression, power. And what was happening on the regional scene with Aslan is he was just steamrolling guys, but he was steamrolling guys that he absolutely should be steamrolling. So it's like, can you really knock him for that? I mean, it's not his fault he's being matched up against guys that, I'm pretty sure a lot of fighters were turning him down regionally because of, the dangers that he brought to the cage. All you could ask of Aslan is to be knocking the guys out in round one that he should be knocking out in round one. And he absolutely was doing that. So I don't know how much you can discredit the level of competition, but it's a talking point nonetheless. Whereas with Anton Turkalj was, unbeaten at the time as well. So he fought Aslan. Aslan started the fight really well. He was catching Turkalj. But then Aslan made the mistake with a low kick, and Turkalj took advantage of that, took Aslan down, and then that was a wrap from there. Aslan didn't have any answer to that grappling and the submission defense of the attack from Turkalj. So that's still the last time we saw Aslan beaten. That's still the last time we saw Aslan being taken down and controlled and submitted. So until we see improvements there, it's hard to be 100% sure that Aslan's improved in those areas. However, with that being said, Aslan made a great move, in my opinion, going to Extreme Couture. He's now training with guys like Sean Strickland, Chris Curtis, I'm sure, like your Magomed Ankalaevs as well. And he's hitting hard wrestling sessions there. So you have to imagine, and bear in mind, before this, he used to train with Alexander Rakic as well. And Rakic has got good wrestling, so an underrated wrestling. So Aslan will already have a level of wrestling and a level of grappling. But at Extreme Couture, you have to make an educated assumption that is getting better. So where Turkalj was able to take Aslan down from a mistake, to be fair, and then control him, that might not be as easy to achieve in this fight than what it was 4 years ago. Because again, Aslan was 23 last time, he's 27 now. So he's had 4 years of development plus the Extreme Couture. He has to be a better version of himself than he was back then. The thing is, I don't think Turkalj is a better version of himself than he was back then. I've got real question marks with Turkalj. Yes, he's 0-3 in the UFC, and you can make the argument that, look, Jailton Almeida is going to be a tough fight for everybody, and he was expected to lose that. Vita Petrino is one of the fighters that are up and coming. You probably expect him to lose that. But then the Tyson Pedro fight, that was the fight that if Turkalj was a UFC caliber fighter that was going to be around in the UFC for a long time, that was the fight that he beats, that he wins. That's his first win in the UFC. And he gets knocked out in round one. I bet Pedro is an underdog. I think he was only just an underdog at like plus 100 against Turkalj. I just think Turkalj is a little bit underwhelming, and I just don't know how long he's going to be around in the UFC. The thing is with Aslan, he's still going to have that dangerous power. He's still going to have that knockout power. He's going to touch up Turkalj. It all depends on whether Turkalj can get the takedowns, can level change, and if Aslan, we'll see the developments if they're there. We'll know in this fight, because I don't think Aslan touches Turkalj once and knocks him out. I think there will be some moments where we see some wrestling and grappling, but I'm putting the trust and faith in Aibo Aslan that the wrestling and grappling has improved, knowing where he's training and who he's training with. There's a 0% chance that Aslan hasn't improved even a little bit, at bare minimum, training at Extreme Couture with those guys. But then you've got that aggressive forward pressure power from Aslan. Technically speaking, he is a little bit green still from the striking perspective. Like, it can look a little bit untechnical at times, but like I say, we said the same thing with Ngannou years ago, winging big bombs and not putting technical strikes together. If fighters get a little bit concerned, if opponents get a little bit concerned, if they don't want to exchange with that type of power and pressure and aggression, then you're going to get away with being a bit untechnical. I kind of think that's where Aslan's going to be here. I don't think Turkali is going to want to stand in these exchanges and roll with the punches and exchange with Aslan, punch for punch, because I think he gets knocked out. And for that, I think that a similar thing is going to happen in this fight to what happened in the Pedro fight in regards to Turkali probably getting knocked out. Turkali doesn't get knocked out and it goes late, I think he takes over. But I do think Aslan is going to have a good first round, defend some takedowns, get out of clinch positions and knock Turkali out. So for those reasons, I'm picking Aibo Aslan to win this fight. And in the next fight, again, stylistically, this is fun as well. We've got Melissa Gatto versus Victoria Dudakova. Now, when I first went into tape, I saw Victoria Dudakova was an underdog, so I went into tape potentially looking to bet Dudakova because I thought, she's got wrestling, striking's okay, and, more often, I'm not going to say more often than not actually, but a lot of the times we've seen in the past where you've got your Russian wrestler against your BJJ player and the top side wrestling nullifies the bottom side BJJ, and the jiu-jitsu from that jiu-jitsu fighter tends to be, throwing submissions from guard, trying to catch arm bars and triangles, all whilst you're losing the rounds, losing the minutes and, on the clock, running the clock down, all that good stuff. So that's where I kind of was in this fight when I first went in looking at it. But I'm not sold on Dudakova's wrestling at this level. Like, can she get takedowns? Yes, probably. But Gatto's jiu-jitsu is legitimately very, very good and good enough to be able to get right back up to her feet if she needs to. But also, it wouldn't shock me if Dudakova just hit a takedown straight away and got first round armbarred either. Like, I don't think that Dudakova's wrestling is that top heavy. I do think that she might be able to get Gatto down earlier, but again, I just don't see her really doing anything from the takedowns. And on the feet, Gatto's actually quite a decent striker. She fights long, sniper shots straight down the middle. I think Dudakova's a little bit outmatched in this fight. I'm not sure, like I say, I don't think the wrestling that she brings to the table is going to be enough to do Gatto over 3 rounds. Maybe take a round somewhere along the line. Maybe, Gatto has a lapse of concentration, one time gets taken down and tries to play the guard game and unable to submit Dudakova and loses around that way. But I just don't think that Gatto loses 2 rounds in this fight, and I don't think she gets finished. I think she's fought better opponents of Dudakova's style, like a Tracy Cortez, for example. I know she lost that fight, but she was in that fight enough against a fighter who I think is levels above Dudakova to show that she can hang at that level. And like I say, it's a step down. Dudakova's a step down in quality and style of a Tracy Cortez. So yeah, look, I think Gatto's got this fight. Striking, she's better. I think from a wrestling perspective, it's just not going to be enough from Dudakova's side. And then the grappling's on Gatto's side as well. And then if Gatto actually gets Dudakova down, which is a possibility, then I think Dudakova's in real trouble, because Gatto top side is legitimately going to be dangerous. So for all the reasons that I've mentioned, I'm picking Melissa Gatto to win this fight. And in the final fight to break down today, we've got Nate Landwehr versus Jamal Emmers. And this could be low-key a really good opener to this card. Nate Landwehr always brings it, in-your-face aggression, pretty much zero defensive responsibility, will eat a shot to land 2 of his own if that's what he takes. And like I say, he loves to be the bully, the aggressor coming forwards. Jamal Emmers, though, I feel like he's turned a corner, even though he's very experienced, and you would imagine that you're not going to say someone's turned a corner when they're 20-7. But there has been moments in his UFC career where he's been a little bit hit and miss. You sort of don't know really what to expect from Emmers. He has the wrestling background, so you'd expect him to use the wrestling, but then he doesn't. And then he stands and strikes with an opponent whose only path to victory is to strike. So Yeah, he's been a little hit and miss, but I think he's starting to put consistency together. And that's not necessarily saying, look, he's sacked off his striking and now he's wrestling more, which is what we want. He's just improved his striking and now he'll mix up a little bit of everything. So he will strike, but then he will hit these takedowns as well when the time's right. And he's a good topside grappler as well. He's very tricky to deal with. And this is where I think that Nate Landwehr's in a tough fight here because, look, the one thing I will say about Landwehr is he's got some good wins on his record. Like, he beat David Onama, who I think is a good fighter. He's beaten Ludovic Klein, who I think is a really good fighter. You know, last time out he lost, but he lost to Dan Ige, who was one of the best in the division and been around for years, so you can't really hold that against him. So Landwehr's not going to be an easy fight. But with Emmers, I just think he's more technically sound, more defensively responsible on the feet striking. And then the wrestling, I think is going to play a big part in here because I do think he's going to be able to get Landwehr down. And Landwehr maybe is a little bit tricky for a couple of minutes or a couple of takedowns of Emmers. But I think eventually Emmers can just start really nullifying this fight, running the clock down. Even if it's a case of Emmers takes Landwehr down, Landwehr's back's against the cage, he starts to stand back up and Emmers follows him half up but then gets a hook into the knee that's currently standing, if that makes sense, and starts to just, you know, pull him down again, making him reset, that type of fight. I think that Emmers can just drag Landwehr around a little bit. I think he can maybe just run the clock down. Maybe it's a little bit grindy, maybe it's ugly, maybe Landwehr starts to tire out and then Emmers starts to take over with the striking when Landwehr's now not as dangerous, not as aggressive, the forward pressure's not as brutal. So yeah, I think that Landwehr's got a tough fight here. I do expect Emmers to get the job done. So for those reasons, I'm picking Jamal Emmers to win this fight. And that's all for this episode of the podcast. As always, for those that's listened, tuned in, if you're on one of the podcast platforms, thank you very much for downloading, listening on Spotify or listening on Apple Music, Amazon Music, wherever you listen to your podcast. And if you want to jump onto the YouTube side to leave a comment and tell me where we disagree or tell me who you're betting on and telling me to let's cash some tickets, whatever it is, then we appreciate everyone jumping onto YouTube, dropping a comment. It is me that replies to the comments. Some weeks I'm better than others, depending on, you know, how busy I am in that week. I'm involved in other aspects of this sport, so my time can be quite stretched from time to time. But I always try my best to get back to some of the comments. And if you are on YouTube, you haven't dropped a subscription to the channel, please do so. Everything helps the algorithm, whether it's the likes, the subscriptions, the comments, whatever it is. So thank you for the support as always. And if you are wanting to jump into the action this weekend and have some fun, have some excitement, some money on the line, then make sure you do so at MMA Play 365, where we've got something for everybody. Everything's affordable. So even if you are subscribing monthly or you just buy one event or you've subscribed annually, you know, even if there's a couple of losing events back to back, the affordability factor on the subscriptions at MMA Play 365 allow you to, you know, not worry if there's a couple of losses because the prices are low enough to be able to win that money back at some point and then profit back on top of that as well. That's one of the reasons why we like the low prices, because it makes it easier for anybody subscribing to win that initial subscription fee back, and then you play in with free money after that. So there you go. MMAplay365.com if you're wanting to jump into the action this weekend. And that's all from me. I'm Newsome. Thanks for listening. We'll see you again next week.